to get through this.
Easy for listening and it's able to do it.
I'm not a great lover of cats.
That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me, that's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to One-on-One Shadowboxing. Today my fellow shadowboxer is Teresa Van Lieshout, who is standing for the federal election for Fremantle. Teresa, I know you started politics before this election and you also represented yourself as an independent at the state election this year. What made you stay with politics after not getting into the state election?
Well, I have for many years, I'm an experienced teacher for 17 years. I have a Master of Education specialising in leadership and management, and I've written 4 books of non-fiction literature. My experience as a teacher drives me into politics because of the way the politicians, Liberal and Labor politicians, have treated teachers right across Australia. And over many years of my experience and skill and expertise, I have developed what I believe to be a great vision for education for our nation. And I believe I have the best vision for education to fix Australia's education system. Not just fix Australia's education system, but create a world-class education system. So I was looking to start in the state parliament. That was my intention, to continue to contest elections till I win a seat in the parliament. And as the opportunity presented itself to contest the federal election by 3 parties, then I was asked and I pursued that for the federal election.
For the federal election, you became a member of the Palmer United Party.
I was endorsed by Mr. Palmer for my expertise in education. Based on my application and also the YouTube broadcasting, I've engaged on lots of issues, in particular education.
And what's happened with the Palmer bubble? It's popped.
It's popped. It didn't quite work out because, well, I'm an intelligent person, and as a teacher I'm used to speaking freely and taking a leadership role, and I'm a great promoter of freedom of speech. I started to issue press releases, and particularly regarding my vision for education, that was the area I had expertise in, so it was logical for me to want to speak to the public and the media regarding that.
And they don't like it, or what?
Well, Mr. Palmer said that my vision for education was not compatible with theirs, but they don't have a policy for education, so he was dishonest about that. And also, I issued press releases about the local community because I'm concerned about the forced amalgamations by Colin Barnett and the Liberal politicians. And also, I issued a press release about my vision to revitalise the port city of Fremantle. So I believe that I was on the right path. Political candidates have to engage the electorate, they have to engage the public, they have to engage the media. I was actually threatened at one point. I was told if I don't toe the party line,
yes,
they're going to cut me off. That's what I was told on the telephone by one of their executives.
They cut you off?
Well, they did cut me off in the end. I was very shocked about it. I was hurt as well,
yes,
and disappointed, and I believe they've made a big mistake. We were actually instructed by email, and I have the emails to prove what I'm saying, to issue 2 press releases a week concerning our electorate. So one of those I issued about education, it was a 3-page one, and they said, well, it can only be 1 page and that's it. And I said, look, this can't be explained in 1 page. It's taken many years for me to formulate this vision, and it doesn't matter how long it is, 1 page or 3 pages, it's what you say and what you write and the vision you're articulating and the priorities that you're giving. That's the important aspect.
So you got the conflict with the Palmer party, they sacked you,
yeah,
and you are not a member of the party anymore, and you are now masquerading as Australian Protectionist party member.
Well, the very same day that happened, I got a phone call from the state chairman, Mr. Bradley Rose of the Australian Protectionist Party, the very same day, and he'd called me before a number of weeks earlier and talked about my candidacy for the Fremantle federal electorate. So we had a conversation before, and he called me the very same day. I got calls from the press as well about what had happened to me, and to give my side of the story, obviously.
And they printed your side of the story in the press?
Not really, not really. The Australian newspaper and the Australian Associated Press printed articles, and I'm a bit concerned about, you know, journalists. I've published 4 books of non-fiction literature, so journalism should be objective and non-partial and non-biased. So I issued my own YouTube broadcast. If you YouTube my name, Teresa Van Lieshout, you can see the rhetoric I engaged about that. But so I had a call from Mr. Rose, and he said, "Well, you want to run with us?" Straight away on the telephone. And so within 3 days, I was endorsed by the Australian Protectionist Party.
Your new party, the Australian Protectionist Party, what sort of objectives they got for their action?
Well, they have a great website, www.protectionist.net. It's been going for a number of years. It has its foundations in the first decade politicians. The first and second Prime Minister, Edmund Barton and Alfred Deakin, were protectionist politicians. And they were Prime Ministers, so they had a whole lot of other politicians as well, protectionist politicians in the state parliament and the federal parliament in the first decade of federation.
Yes.
They established some very important institutions in Australian society, our constitution. They established the state and federal parliamentary system, and they established the judicial system as well, particularly the High Court. They worked.
So they got a great tradition in politics.
Absolutely. The foundation of the Australian Protectionist Party goes back to the first decade of federation from 1901 to 1910, where protectionist politicians dominated the state and federal parliament. So there's a great historical significance and importance to our party. Also, they have the general policies on the website to do with protection of the family, protection of the environment, protection of Australian-owned and way of life, protection of our historical values and culture, protection of Australian-owned and made industries, businesses, organisations and companies. And we're adding one, protection for Australian rights to quality education as well. Also, protection for free speech too. So some of those fundamental values of democracy, freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble in groups and to articulate your views. So those sorts of protections, that is the...
It's part of the Protectionist Party's vision.
That's right.
How can we have problems with free speech in Australia? They say we are a democratic country and we got all the rights for everything. We can protest, we can have free speech, we can have elections, we can have been nominated for any political party or independence. So what's the problem with this system?
I think there are a number of problems with free speech in Australia. There's a famous recent High Court case, Corneloup Brothers, where the Liberal and Labor Attorney Generals around Australia went to the High Court to destroy the rights of the Corneloup brothers, who were Christian men preaching the New Testament in South Australia. Now, 3 Supreme Court judges in South Australia had ruled in favour of the brothers preaching in public on the basis of implied freedom of speech in the Constitution. Now, the Attorney Generals, Liberal and Labor politicians, went to the High Court, used their position, spent millions of dollars of tax money going to the High Court to destroy their rights. And those judges did destroy their rights. Also, in my case, in the Supreme Court, Liberal Attorney General Michael Mission intervened and tried to destroy my rights to free speech in the West Australian Supreme Court, when at the very same time the Liberal Party, the head of the Supreme Court, Wayne Martin, had given an injunction to the Liberal Party, politicians and candidates, for free political signage throughout the state of Western Australia, and then allowed me to be prosecuted, an independent candidate, for exactly the same matter, for political signage. So they're giving free speech to the people in charge, the Liberal and Labor politicians, and
but not for the independents.
No, not for the independents, and also for the citizen as well. So the citizens' rights to free speech. And a lot of people think that there is an implied freedom of speech in the Australian Constitution, but it's not an explicit right. Australia is the only country in the Western world, the only nation in the Western world that doesn't have a Bill of Rights for its citizens.
That's very true.
And also the right of free political communication is implied in the Constitution. The High Court judges in the 1980s and 1990s, there were a lot of High Court cases where they were trying to promote freedom of speech and create a Bill of Rights for Australians, but the politicians kept blocking it all the time. So Liberal and Labor politicians don't want free speech because it maintains their power and control over society. Exactly the same argument as I provide why they don't want people to be educated, because the more educated you are, the more you are exercising your rights and speaking freely and fighting for justice for issues. And so what it does is maintains their power and control over society. You know, as long as they're in charge, what it creates is it creates a lot of injustice like homelessness and suicide and people dying in prisons and psychiatric facilities, and they don't talk about those issues.
And what do you think why Australia is the only Western civilization or country who not have the Bill of Rights for their own citizens?
Well, again, the argument that it maintains their own power and control. And if you have a look at the Constitution, there are implied rights to freedom of speech, but they're not explicit and they're not guaranteed. The Australian Constitution really needs to be developed a lot more. It essentially was a document created in 1901 and preceding that, where it established our parliamentary system and judicial system. Unlike the American Constitution, where they had explicit rights written into their Constitution, Australia doesn't have that. So under our Australian Constitution, the citizens have no rights. The guarantee, even the status of citizenship is not guaranteed in the Australian Constitution. Freedom of speech is not guaranteed. Freedom of religion is not guaranteed. Access to courts is not guaranteed in our Constitution. So these create huge problems.
So what's happening with solicitors who are human rights specialists like Melissa Parkey? Why don't they fight in the Parliament for Bill of Rights for Australians and freedom of speech in the Constitution?
Well, I did a YouTube broadcast exactly on that issue, that she's a human rights lawyer. She's had the seat of Fremantle for over 2 terms, and she's done nothing to promote a Bill of Rights for Australian citizens, which makes her even more guilty. She's focused on international issues, and now she's just been made the new development.
But we've got issues in Australia which are not solved, and no one is talking about it.
Well, I'm one of the very few political candidates who's actually talking about these issues and fighting for the rights of the citizens and the injustice that's been engaged against the people, I've said, with the homelessness and the suicide and people dying in our prisons and psychiatric facilities. So these are huge human rights abuses which have been engaged by the government, really. And Melissa Park is guilty of that as well. She's been in the Fremantle seat for more than 2 terms. She's done nothing to raise these issues. She's said and done nothing to stop it. So therefore, she's not effective. She is ineffective. And at this point in Australia's history, Australia does not need a Minister for International Development for the Fremantle federal electorate. It needs someone like me who will fight for the rights of the citizens and fights for the rights of communities.
On that note, we have to have a short break, but please stay with us, because after the break, we're coming back with more discussion with Teresa and her vision on education.